Chapter 20. Baron Franz de Epinay and Vicomte Albert de Morcerf, two young French gentlemen, had decided to go to Rome for the carnival and had therefore reserved a suite in the Hotel de Londres. Alright, so we meet two new characters. Okay, Baron Franz de Epinay, and this one's very important, Viscount Albert de Morcerf. They found on their arrival that the suite consisted of two small bedrooms and a living room. The bedrooms overlooked the street, the fact which Signor Pastrini, the hotel keeper, stressed as though it added an incalculable value to the suite. All the other rooms on the floor were rented to a very rich personage who, according to Signor Pastrini, was either Sicilian or Maltese. The rooms are satisfactory, Signor Pastrini, said Franz, but now we'd like some supper and we'll need a carriage for tomorrow and the days following. You'll have the supper immediately, replied the hotel keeper, but the carriage is another matter. What do you mean another matter? Cried Albert. Let's be serious, Signor Pastrini. We need a carriage. We'll do everything we can to get you one, sir. That's all I can say. And when will we have the answer? Asked Franz. Tomorrow morning. Look, said Albert, we'll pay a little more, that's all. I know how it is in Paris. 25 francs for ordinary days, 30 or 35 francs for Sundays and holidays. I'm afraid you won't be able to find a carriage in Rome even for double that sum. Then we'll put horses on my carriage. It's slightly battered from the journey, but that doesn't matter. There are no horses available. Albert looked at Franz with the expression of a man who has been given an incomprehensible answer. Do you understand that, Franz? No horses. Well then, we can have post horses, can't we? They were all rented over 2 weeks ago. The only ones left now are those which are absolutely necessary for the continuation of the service. What do you say to that? Asked Franz. I say that when a thing is beyond my comprehension, I stop thinking about it and pass on to something else. Is our supper ready, Signor Pastrini? Yes, Excellency. Very well, let's have it. But what about the carriage and the horses? Said Franz. Don't worry about them, my friend. They'll come all by themselves. It's only a question of price. And Albert de Morcerf, with that admirable philosophy which believes that nothing is impossible for a man whose purse is full, ate his supper, went to bed, slept soundly, and dreamed that he was racing through the carnival in a carriage and six. So can you see Albert? Rich boy, party boy. He sounds like someone who is young, who is handsome, who is rich. Okay? And he's very used to getting what he wants just because he has enough money for it. Franz rang as soon as he awoke the next morning. Signor Pastrini answered his call in person. Well, said the hotel keeper triumphantly, without even waiting for Franz to question him. I was right not to promise you anything yesterday, Excellency. You're too late. There's not a single carriage available in Rome for the last 3 days of the carnival. Which, of course, are just the days when a carriage is absolutely necessary, remarked Franz. Well, I don't think much of your eternal city, said Albert. There are no carriages available from Sunday morning till Tuesday night, Excellency, but from now till Sunday you can have 50 if you like, said Pastrini, desirous of maintaining the dignity of the capital of the Christian world in the eyes of his guests. Ah, that's something at least, said Albert. Today is Thursday. Who knows what may happen between now and Sunday? Do you still wish to have a carriage till Sunday? Of course, exclaimed Albert. Do you think we want to run around Rome on foot like lawyers' clerks? When would you like the carriage? In an hour. It will be waiting for you at the door in an hour. Franz had several letters to write to Franz, so he let Albert have the carriage all day. At 5 o'clock Albert returned. He had delivered his letters of recommendation, procured invitations for all his evenings, and seen the city of Rome. One day had been sufficient for him to do all that. I have a surprise for you, he said to Franz. What is it? It's impossible to get a carriage and horses for the carnival, isn't it? It certainly is. But we could get a cart, couldn't we? Perhaps. And a pair of oxen? Probably. Well then, there you are. I'm going to have the cart decorated and will dress as Neapolitan harvesters. Exclaimed Franz. For once you've had a good idea. Have you told anyone else about it? Yes, the hotel keeper. He assured me that nothing could be easier. I wanted to have the oxen's horns gilded, but he told me this would take 3 days, so we'll have to do without that little luxury. Just then the door opened and Signor Pastrini put in his head. Well, said Albert, have you found the cart and oxen? "I found something better than that," replied Pastrini with an extremely self-satisfied air. "What is it?" "I suppose you know that the Count of Monte Cristo lives on the same floor as you. Well, he has learned of your difficulty and would like to offer you 2 seats in his carriage and 2 seats before the window in the Palazzo Rospoli." Franz and Albert looked at each other. "Should we accept such an offer from a stranger?" asked Albert. Okay, so there's someone named the Count of Monte Cristo in the same hotel as Albert. As it's some people pronounce it Albert, guys. Okay, but it's spelled Albert. But it's pronounced Albert because he's French. Okay. Someone's offering Albert, the use of his carriage, and the Count of Monte Cristo is offering, "You can use my carriage." "What kind of a man is this Count of Monte Cristo?" asked Franz. "He's a very great lord, either Sicilian or Maltese, I don't know which, but in any case, he's as noble as a Borghese and as rich as a gold mine." "It seems to me," said Franz to Albert, "that if this man is as well-mannered as our host says he is, he ought to have conveyed his invitation in some other way, either by writing to us or..." At this moment there was a knock on the door. "Come in," said Franz. A servant wearing an extremely elegant livery appeared in the doorway. "From the Count of Monte Cristo for Monsieur Franz d'Epinay and Monsieur Albert de Morcerf," he said, handing 2 cards to the hotel keeper, who in turn handed them to the 2 young men. "The Count of Monte Cristo," continued the servant, "requests the honor of calling on these fine gentlemen tomorrow morning and would like to know what hour is convenient for them." "Tell the Count," said Franz, "that on the contrary, it is we who shall have the honor of calling on him tomorrow morning." The servant withdrew. "Now that's what I call overwhelming us with politeness," said Albert. "You're right, Signor Pastrini. Your Count of Monte Cristo is a very noble gentleman." "I take it you accept his offer?" said Pastrini. "Yes, of course," replied Albert. "However, I admit I regret the loss of our cart and harvesters, and if it weren't for the windows in the Palazzo Rospoli, I think I'd go back to my original idea. What do you say, Franz?" "I say it's the windows in the Palazzo Rospoli that decide me too." The next morning Franz sent for Signor Pastrini, who presented himself with his usual obsequiousness. It was 9 o'clock. "Do you think we can call on the Count of Monte Cristo at this hour?" asked Franz. "Certainly," replied Pastrini. "The Count is a very early riser. I'm sure he's been up for over 2 hours. In that case, Albert, if you're ready, let's go thank our neighbor for his courtesy. Let's go." Franz and Albert did not have far to go. Pastrini preceded them and rang the doorbell for them. A servant opened the door. "I, Signor Francesi," said Pastrini. The servant bowed and motioned them to enter. They walked through 2 rooms furnished with an elegance they would not have thought possible in Signor Pastrini's hotel. Then they came into a drawing room of extraordinary elegance. An oriental rug covered the floor. On the walls hung magnificent paintings, interspersed with splendid weapons and trophies. Large tapestried curtains hung before each door. "If your excellencies will take a seat," said the servant, "I will inform the Count that you are here." He disappeared through one of the doors. Franz and Albert exchanged a glance, then looked again at the furniture, the paintings, and the weapons. It all seemed even more magnificent the second time they looked at it than the first. "Well, what do you think of this?" said Franz. "I think our neighbor must be either a stockbroker who made a very successful speculation, or some prince traveling incognito. We'll soon find out, because here he is." A door opened and a curtain was pushed aside to make way for the owner of all those riches. "Gentlemen," said the Count of Monte Cristo as he entered, "please accept my excuses for making you call for me, but I was afraid I might disturb you if I visited you at an earlier hour. Besides, you told me you were coming, and I kept myself at your disposal." "Franz and I are very grateful to you, Count," said Albert. "You've solved a great problem for us. We were inventing all sorts of fantastic vehicles when your gracious invitation arrived." "It's that idiot Pastrini's fault that I didn't come to your aid sooner," said the Count, motioning the 2 young men to sit down on a sofa. "He told me nothing about your problem. As soon as I learned I could be of use to you, I was glad of the opportunity to pay you my respects." The 2 young men bowed. "Also," continued the Count, "there's to be an execution at the Piazza del Popolo today. I told my steward yesterday to find me a window overlooking the scene, so perhaps I can also render you that service." He reached out his hand and pulled a bell cord. A moment later, a man of 45 or 50 entered the room. Monsieur Bertruccio, said the Count, have you obtained a window overlooking the Piazza del Popolo, as I instructed you to do yesterday? Yes, Excellency, replied the steward, but it was quite late. What? Said the Count, frowning. Didn't I tell you to get me a window? Yes, and your Excellency has one, but it had already been rented to Prince Lobaniev, and I was obliged to pay 100. That will do, Monsieur Bertruccio. Spare these gentlemen the details of your arrangement. You got the window. That's all we need to know. Give the address of the house to the coachman. The steward bowed and prepared to withdraw. Just a moment, said the Count. Ask Pastrini if he has received the program of the execution. That won't be necessary, said Franz, taking a notebook from his pocket. I saw the program and copied it down. Here it is. Very well then, Monsieur Bertuccio, you may withdraw. Notify us when lunch is ready. Will you gentlemen do me the honor of having lunch with me? We don't want to abuse your hospitality, Count, said Albert. Not at all. It will give me great pleasure. You'll be able to return the favor some day in Paris. Monsieur Bertuccio, have the table set for 3. The Count took Franz's notebook and read aloud. The following men will be executed today, February 22. Andrea Rondolo, guilty of the murder of the honored and venerated Don Cesar Terlini, and Peppino alias Rocca Priori, convicted of complicity with the detestable bandit Luigi Vampa and the men of his band. The first will be Mazzolato, the second will be decapitated. That was the original program, but I was in the home of Cardinal Rospigliosi last night, and I was told that one of the prisoners has been reprieved. Which one? Asked Franz. Okay, so this is so weird, guys. No, the Count of Monte Cristo got them, like, tickets or seats to see, like, some form of entertainment going on, no? And it's executions, which is so odd to me that in this time, that's what some people went to for entertainment. They would go to public executions, no, and they would watch it for fun, which is really messed up, no? But the Count of Monte Cristo bought them tickets to watch these executions. The second one, replied the Count, that will be preview of a decapitation, but there's still the mazzolato, which is still quite a curious form of execution the first time you see it, or even the second. But decapitation is too simple. Nothing unexpected ever happens. Europeans know nothing when it comes to executions and tortures, added the Count contemptuously. They're in the childhood, or rather the old age, of cruelty. You sound as though you've made a comparative study of methods of execution all over the world, Count, remarked Franz. There are a few of them I haven't seen, replied the Count coldly. And you found pleasure in watching such horrible sights? My first feeling was repugnance, then indifference, then curiosity. Curiosity, that's a terrible word to use. Why, death is the only real serious preoccupation in life. Isn't it worthwhile, therefore, to study the different ways in which the soul can take leave of the body, and how, according to their character, their temperament, and even the customs of their country, different individuals undergo this passage from being to nothingness. As for myself, I can tell you one thing: the more one sees others die, the easier it becomes to face death oneself. Thus, in my opinion, death is perhaps an ordeal, but it is not an expiation. I don't understand you very well, said Franz. Please explain yourself. You've no idea how strongly you've aroused my curiosity. Listen, said the Count, his face taking on an expression of hatred. If a man has tortured and killed your father, your mother, your sweetheart, in short, one of those beings who leave an eternal emptiness and a perpetuality bleeding wound when they are torn from your heart, do you think society has given you sufficient reparation because the blade of the guillotine has passed between the murderer's trapezius and his occipital bone? Because the man who made you undergo long years of mental and emotional suffering has undergone a few seconds of physical pain? Yes, I know, said Franz. Human justice is sadly lacking in consolation. It can only shed blood in exchange for blood, but we mustn't ask it to do more than it can. And I've mentioned only a very simple case, went on the Count. the case in which society avenges the death of one individual by the death of another, but aren't there all sorts of suffering which a man can undergo without being provided by society with any means of vengeance whatsoever? Aren't there crimes for which the impalements of the Turks, the throws of the Persians, or the rolled tendons of the Iroquois would be too gentle, and which are nevertheless left unpunished by our indifferent society? Answer, aren't there any such crimes? Yes, said Franz, and it's in order to punish them that dueling is tolerated. Ah, dueling, cried the Count, a fine method of vengeance. A man has taken your sweetheart from you, seduced your wife, or dishonored your daughter, from a life which had a right to expect from God the share of happiness which he promised every human being in creating him. He has made an existence of pain, misery, or infamy, and you believe his crime avenged because you have thrust a sword into his chest or lodged a bullet in his head? Come, come. And of course he may even emerge victorious with his sin washed away in the eyes of the world. No, no. If I ever wanted to take vengeance on someone, that's not how I do it. You disapprove of dueling, then? You would refuse to fight a duel? Asked Albert, astonished to hear such a strange theory. No, not at all, said the Count. Let me make myself clear. I would fight a duel for an insult, a blow, or a lie, and I do it with hardly a thought, because thanks to the skill I've acquired in all bodily exercises, and the gradual way in which I've accustomed myself to danger, I'd be almost certain of killing my opponent. Oh yes, I'd fight a duel for something of that sort, but for slow, profound, infinite, and eternal suffering, I'd try to avenge myself by inflicting similar suffering. An eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But, said Franz, with that theory which makes you your own judge and executioner, it would be difficult to stay clear of the power of the law. Hatred is blind, anger is foolhardy, and he who pours out vengeance risks having to drink a bitter draught. If he's poor and inept, yes, but not if he's rich and clever. Besides, the worst that can happen to him is a public execution, and what does he care about that as long as he has had his vengeance? I'm almost sorry that wretched Peppino won't be decapitated as the program says. You'd see how long it lasts and whether it's really worth speaking of. But this is a strange conversation to be having during the carnival. How did we begin talking about such things? Oh yes, I remember. I mentioned that I could offer you a place at my window, and you'll have it too, but for now let's go to lunch. Here comes someone to announce that it's ready. The two young men stood up and walked into the dining room. During the meal, which was excellent and admirably served, Franz tried to catch Albert's eyes in order to read there what impression their host's word had made on him. But Albert was apparently unconcerned with everything except his own hearty appetite. As for the Count, he hardly touched the food set before him. He seemed as though he might have sat down at table with his guests only in order to be polite, and that he was awaiting their departures in order to be served some strange dish of his own. At the end of the meal, Franz took out his watch and said, "Excuse us, Count, but we still have 1,000 things to do." "May I ask what they are?" "Some sort of costume is obviously necessary for the carnival, and we don't have any yet." "Don't worry about that. We have a private room at the Piazza del Popolo. I'll have costumes brought to us, and we can change into them right there and after the execution. It's 12:30 now, gentlemen. We have no time to lose." As Franz, Albert, and the Count of Monte Cristo approached the Piazza del Popolo, the crowd grew denser, and they could see two things rising above the heads of the people: the obelisk surmounted by a cross, which marks the center of the square, and the two tall wooden uprights of the guillotine, with a metal blade glittering between them. The window, which had been rented at such an exorbitant price, was on the third floor of a large mansion situated between the Via del Babuino and the Ponte Pincio. It was in a sort of dressing room adjoining a bedroom. By closing the door between the two rooms, the occupants of the dressing room could enjoy the spectacle in privacy. Outside, the entire square seemed to have been transformed into a vast amphitheater. Every window and balcony was packed with spectators, and every projection on the front of a building which could support a man had its living statue. The Count was right. The most interesting sight in life is death. Suddenly the noise of the crowd died down as if by magic. The The door of the church had opened. A group of penitents appeared first, each holding a lighted candle in its hand and wearing over his head a grey sack with eye holes cut into it. Behind the penitents came a tall man who was bare from the waist up. At his left side hung a large knife in a sheath. Over his shoulder he carried a large iron mace. This man was the executioner. Beside him walked, in the order in which they were to be executed, first Peppino and then Andrea, each accompanied by 2 priests. Andrea was being held up under each arm by a priest. From time to time both men kissed a crucifix which was held out to them by the confessor. At this sight alone, Franz felt his legs go weak. He looked at Albert. He was as pale as his shirt. Only the Count appeared impassive. Meanwhile, the 2 condemned men had come close enough for their features to be distinguished. Peppino was a handsome young man, with sun-tanned skin and a wild, proud look in his eyes. Andrea was short and fat, and his face had a look of base cruelty. "I thought you said there was only 1 execution," said Franz to the Count. "I told you the truth," replied Monte Cristo coldly. "But there are 2 prisoners." "Yes, but one of them is about to die, and the other still has a long years of life ahead of him. It seems to me that if his reprieve is going to come, there's no time to be lost." "Here it comes now. Look," said the Count. True enough, just as Peppino arrived at the foot of the guillotine, a penitent burst through the ranks of the soldiers, who made no effort to stop him, ran up to the leader of the penitents, and handed him a piece of paper. The leader of the penitents read the paper, raised his hand, and cried out, "Praises be to God and to His Holiness the Pope. Peppino alias Rocca Priori has been pardoned." Loud cheers arose from the crowd. "Peppino pardoned!" shouted Andrea, completely awakened from the torpor into which he seemed to have fallen. "Why pardon for him and not for me? We were to die together. They promised me he'd die before I did. They don't have the right to make me die alone. I won't die alone. I won't die alone." He tore himself away from the 2 priests, writhing, shrieking, and making frenzied efforts to break the cords which bound his hands together. The executioner motioned to 2 of his assistants, who leaped down from the platform of the guillotine and seized the condemned man. "What's happening?" asked Franz, for since the entire scene had taken place in Roman dialect, he had not understood very clearly. "What's happening?" said the Count. "Don't you understand? That human being who's going to die down there is furious because his fellow man isn't going to die with him. If he had his choice, he'd tear the other man to pieces with his teeth and nails rather than let him go on enjoying life while he himself is about to be deprived of it. O mankind, race of crocodiles, how well I recognize you down there and how worthy you are of yourselves." As Andrea struggled with the 2 executioner's assistants, he cried out, "He must die! I want him to die! They don't have the right to kill me alone!" The struggle was frightful to see, but the 2 assistants finally carried Andrea to the top of the platform. The entire crowd had turned against him by now, and 20,000 voices were shrieking, "Kill him! Kill him!" Franz stepped back, but the Count seized his arm and held him in place. "What's the matter?" said the Count. "If you're feeling pity, it's very badly placed. If you saw a mad dog in the streets, you'd shoot it without pity. If you saw a mad dog without pity, even though the poor animal's only crime was to have been bitten by another dog. Yet here you are taking pity on a man who was bitten by no other man, but who nevertheless killed his benefactor, and who now no longer able to kill because his hands are tied, wants to bring on the death of his companion in captivity, his comrade in misfortune. No, look. The Count of Monte Cristo is so creepy. He's like, you watch this execution happen because this is a bad man. He deserves to be executed. You watch it. Don't feel sorry for him. So dark. The recommendation had become needless, for Franz was fascinated by the horrible spectacle. The 2 assistants had carried the condemned man to the top of the platform, and there, despite his struggling, biting, and shrieking, had forced him to kneel. The executioner raised his mace, and the 2 assistants stepped back. The condemned man tried to stand up, but the mace crashed down on his left temple, making a dull, heavy sound. The man fell face downward like an ox, then rolled over on his back. The executioner dropped his mace, drew his knife, and slit open the man's throat. Then he stood up on the man's stomach and began to knead it with his feet. Each time he pressed down with his foot, a jet of blood spurted from the man's throat. Franz started backward and sank half fainting into a chair. Albert remained standing, but his eyes were closed, and he clung tightly to the window curtain. The Count was as erect and triumphant as the avenging angel. So this guy, this criminal, was executed in such a horrible way, and Franz and Albert were dizzy and they couldn't stand up straight, no, and they were so disgusted by it. But the Count was just watching, kuno. He was standing so tall, and he was kuno like, he looked triumphant like an angel watching this brutal execution. So creepy, the Count of Monte Cristo.